Columbus never set foot on the mainlands of America. And everybody that studied any type of history know that Columbus didn't discover anything.
They tell me that Christopher Columbus landed in the Western Hemisphere in 1492 and that he was lost. So lost that it would take 500 years to know his place in history. It seems I've known Columbus most of my life, or at least his legacy for claiming and discovering places and cultures that were never lost and were never unclaimed. I thought I saw him in a parade in 1990, lost as usual, lost among unfamiliar images. I was born in the largest city that bears his name, a city that links itself to an ocean voyage, even though the nearest ocean is hundreds of miles away. Every year, on or near October 12th, Columbus, the city that is, holds a huge holiday celebration dedicated to discovery. I was told that in 1893, 400 years after his landing, city officials from Columbus attended the Columbian Exposition in Chicago. There they discovered a horticulture building. The city officials decided they must have one as well in a place called Franklin Park. 100 years later, this park and this conservatory would become the center of a controversy. What more should I have expected from such a legacy? But my story starts in Franklin Park, with the memory of people and how they use spaces. Franklin Park is surrounded on three sides by an African American community. On the fourth side is a bridge linked to another culture. The city closed the bridge for repairs. It stood during those 10 years as a wall, blocking the path to two different places. In 1990, these same city officials could claim improvements in Franklin Park by closing it down altogether for 3 years with something called AmeriFlora, and they would spend over $100 million in the process. But my story does start with Franklin Park in the late 1960s. I always remembered the park as a place where young African Americans gathered on Sundays and other days in the hundreds, and sometimes in the thousands.
I used to play football, and I used to ride my bike up around the park, and I used to run with my aunt.
And we used to have Easter there. Yeah, we used to put the eggs down there, and we had to hunt for them.
1988 and 1989, the years right before the closing of Franklin Park, African Americans still gathered in the hundreds and in the thousands. I needed to know why it would soon all come to an end.
I wouldn't say that that our use of space as an African American is different. I think that we see things different and that we have different experiences, and that, well, not just blacks, African Americans, but all subcultural groups, all the different cultural groups, we have our own baggage. But in our society, that's not this sort of multicultural expression doesn't manifest itself in the environment. It's one or the other.
One or the other. A new place with a new history.
Black people see this as a neighborhood park, and they see it historically as a park for black folks. White folks see this as a major asset for the city of Columbus, and more or less a regional park.
Also, it's because it's the heart of the black community, and for years, ever since I can remember, this has been, quote unquote, a black park.
Franklin Park is a big park for family.
Okay, this is a place to be for us teenagers. Yeah, and ain't no other place to go. If they close it down, ain't no other place to go.
You go into a mall, people look at you like, if the color of your skin is dark, you don't need to be there unless you have any money or unless you have a bag in your hand. I feel if you can come down here, you don't have to worry about who you are with. You don't have to worry about people looking at you. You can come down here, have a social life. Young men come down here to meet young ladies. Young ladies do the same. People come out here to show off their cars. And where else in the world can you do that?
Extremely lucky, man. This is a paradise in terms of metropolitan living. We've raised our kids here in this wonderful palatial home and with this great scene. As a matter of fact, when the kids were little, they used to get mad because people were walking in the park. They thought they were in their yard. When I came here, these homes were experiencing the effects of gas replacing coal as a fuel, and these big homes were no longer status symbols, but statements of foolishness. Well, now that the suburbia is redefined as a foolish move because of the gas to get out there and back, and the rejuvenation needed in the inner cities, and the flow of financial funds, and a lot of different reasons, you have these barns, these big symbols of foolishness, all of a sudden being the possessions that everybody wants again. So Franklin Park is now tagged to one of those knob hills on the way, and here they come.
Ameriflora, coming up roses.
Ameriflora 1992. Columbus will get a 300-foot-tall observation tower like this one in Dusseldorf for a rotating bird's-eye view of the whole show. And fountains will be spraying. There'll be wildlife in the ponds and lakes and streams. Some kids will climb and bounce on the latest in playground equipment, while others will splash in the water or dig in the sand. Crowds will find their way to Columbus as millions of visitors from all parts of the United States and from around the world come here to see the first international flower show ever to be held in the USA.
Ameriflora 92 is the first international floral and garden exhibition ever to be scheduled for the United States.
we are proposing this event be held for the outdoor exhibition in Franklin, Wolf, and Academy Park. We feel this is the best site in Columbus. The Franklin Park, Wolf, and Academy Park sites are the flagship parks of Columbus. They have magnificent trees and shrubs and contour within the site. The Franklin Park Conservatory exists there, and it is within close proximity to the downtown area. We recognize the difficulties of having this program in an existing park, and we recognize the inconveniences to residents and other people affected by the event.
I could very easily, reel off 20 or 30 other things that I think might be more worthy of our finances or our concerns in the immediate future, but it's certainly a business proposition.
I sat back and watched
in Franklin County, in the state of Ohio,
space,
and in the United States of America, because we will be America's first International Floral and Garden Exhibition. From the very beginning, this has been an outstanding cooperative venture between the private sector, the community, our public officials, and people from all walks of life.
Thank you very much, John. Governor Celeste, distinguished fellow public officials. Almost 500 years ago, Columbus left the European continent, and here we are. Almost 30 months from now, we celebrate that as the largest city in the world named after Christopher Columbus. What a wonderful opportunity. John, you and your colleagues and all the volunteers that have worked so hard have got us on the launching pad.
Hey, wait a minute, we got half the news media down the hole. Let's fill it in.
That's a good idea.
That is not
And I'll tell you, they don't know where I'm going to throw my shovel.
Stand by, guys. Good times are coming.
Are you ready? 1, 2, 3, toss. Good. We keep doing more. 1, 2, 3, toss. Good. Wait, get it? You got enough. That's it. You got enough? More dirt.
Couldn't conceive of a circumstance like Flora not generating, well, if not riots in the streets, certainly grave concerns in the late 60s, when the group most directly affected by it, a minority population in the central city, was not getting the most direct benefit from it, yet was being denied basically access to a public park for a year or so, in order for what? National exposure of the city, economic development of the community, dollars from tourists coming in. But how much of that is going to that neighborhood and to these people?
Can't take my grandkids to the park. It's like a piece of history that's cut off. I don't see where we fit in there. I just don't have any memory of, great floral shows.
Got together in the park, it was something bad going on. But that's not true. It was just a cultural and social outlet for us.
Franklin Park was a walking distance for everybody in this area and all around, Now we have no park.
They took it away from us, and now they wonder why we're all hanging out somewhere.
When that happened, it caused all the youth that had anything to do for the summer was caused to take to the street and get together on streets like Livingston Avenue.
A lot of folks are nervously watching East Side kids as they congregate in great numbers on Livingston Avenue these days. The kids are claiming they don't have any good places to go now that Franklin Park has been closed.
African Americans or various subcultural groups in this society, they have to fit within a framework that's foreign to them, whether it's a European precedent, Spanish precedent, or whatever, that is totally alien to them. And I think I used the example of the English open lot plan, which is basically the single-family detached house. And I was making a correlation between that and the extended family or the more community-based activities that occur in ethnic communities, and they don't fit. And so what you find are those groups improvising within that and changing that structure. The lot lines are still the same, the houses are still in the same position, but the activities start to take place in different areas, and it starts to reshape the environment. Sidewalks are used to just walk, basically, in our society. If you're hanging out on the sidewalk, you're loitering or you're selling drugs or doing something bad. But in this community, people are out having fun, listening to music. They open the windows up on the second floor, put the speakers there, bring the couch outside, the TV outside. They want to be outside. But the framework doesn't allow for that. And so they change the framework. The front yard becomes the living room. The sidewalk becomes the hallways. And I see that as an interesting pattern that designers can pick up on, looking at how people use space and transforming these frameworks into interesting places for all people.
Piazza d'Italia is a plaza that's downtown, and those of us who have studied landscape architecture, it's like one of the projects that you learn about in school, and it won awards. It's basically kind of a facade of, classical columns and a fountain. It was kind of a new way of thinking and to create a space. And part of the problem with it, though, is its location. A plaza should be where there's access, where people can easily get to it, where people can see in and see out, where you come there for your lunch. And the problem with Piazza d'Italia is no one used it because there isn't very good access. And even though, as far as design, it's a wonderful project, but as far as the use, I think it failed. Once it's off the board, and once it's built, it's about how people relate to it. The success of a space has to do with how people use it, not how beautiful it is or how, well designed. Something that might not look wonderful can be a space that's really populated and people love to come there.
Maybe I could find my lost memories in other parks and in other histories.
Well, I came here in 1953, and I got off the train about a half a mile from here down on Wood Street, DOSP station. I was 11 years old. I played in this park from 11 years old, and all of my high school, junior high school years was spent here in this park. Mostly during the day, especially on days when we didn't go to school, and there was a lot of days like that. We went to school in this park, so that this park historically plays, you know, a very important role on people who lived in West Oakland.
It also provided a kind of safe haven because growing up in West Oakland, there were a lot of pool halls and a lot of other kind of undesirable institutions that a lot of us hung out around. But when we came to the park, they had pool tables here, we had ping pong, we had a lot of the same facilities that were in the community, but in a more desirable setting, so it was easier for us to come here. And then we had another kind of supervision too.
The infirmary did such a total service for the community that Dorothy Seal Pitts was the head director here then, and she was a real motivator.
I didn't know that this could be different. You see, when I came to the Oakland Recreation Department, they didn't even have any guidelines for recreation. We had to deal with the definition, to do things to grow and develop. So I said, I'm not sure that I can do that job. The community was asking for this. All right, so I moved in. Goodness, is this what I have to work with? Well, I see we got to have the lights on. I need to do some training. We'll have to, and I began to just run down the list of things that I felt needed to be done if this was the population that I was going to serve.
We had talent shows here. We had dances here. Even our school dances, from the closest high school is Max, school I went to. We had many clubs that were at the school were sponsored through the agency and through the directors of different programs that were over here, like our dance club. Ms. Beckford was intricately involved with that.
I started with the Parks and Recreation Department in 1947 and continued through 1967, so that was a long span. The infirmary was not the first dance classes where I started. It was an experiment. There had never had modern dance or creative dance in any recreation department in the United States in 1947. So I didn't have anyone's footsteps I had to follow into. So this was where I established as the Advanced Dance Center. In other words, after you took dance in other places, you became advanced. I wanted the girls to go to a higher level.
I spent a lot of times here after school learning how to play football, learning how to play baseball. First little league team I was on was right out here on this very ball diamond. When they built the pool over here, it's the pool that my uncle brought me over here and threw me in the 10 feet and told me to get out, you know. So it's a lot of memories growing up around the park.
I began to hire more and more dance teachers. I always told them that if ever you felt a need to sit down and just talk to the girls, woman talk, do that. Dance is not the first thing. Don't think you have to get them to do a dance class.
And these people that were like directors of the park or directors of programs within the park were also intricately involved in the school, so that people like Lou Jones, Bill Patterson, Ruth Beckford, they also taught programs, extended programs. They weren't teachers, but they had extended programs like in the schools. So we saw these people outside of this. They became our extended families.
In dance classes, all of the dances were choreographed by the students. So parents and friends came knowing that they would see a totally unique experience.
Because out of this park came a lot of sports notables. Like over there on that basketball court, Paul Silas played there, and Bill Russell played there, and Frank Robinson played in this park, and Veda Pinson played in this park. And we felt very, very good having our own park in our community, because my house is walking distance right around the corner. So I get here early, and I'd play in the center there where we had pool tables, we had ping pong, played cards. Every night there was these dances, and then the fights would happen. And so it was a lifestyle. I mean, it was the whole gamut of, you know, what a young black kid, you know, really comes to know, you know, as his culture. Here you learn how to live in your community. And you got to really, you know, vie on a lot of different levels, you know, coming up, you know, during that particular period anyway. If you wasn't fighting, you had to learn other ways to survive in this, because this park in West Oakland was known as one of the, you know, the most notorious, and the better fighters came out of West Oakland. So West Oakland had a reputation of being really a bad place. But living here, you know, being at home, it was a good place to be, because you carried that reputation with you wherever you went, you know.
Out here all night. Stay out here all night for very good place. Haiti, going into the night, no, kids today. Even kids take over.
It will take just moments to reach the world's largest revolving restaurant. Once there, you can explore any or all of the summit's 3 levels.
Well, just behind us, I think the camera can see fairly well, is Belle Isle, commonly called in the black community Bella. And over the years, it's been a place for recreation, for families to go on their family reunions, a place for blacks who are surrounded by concrete and tenements to get themselves out close to the water and really enjoy nature for a period of time. And I think it's very valued by Detroiters for that reason. It's the one place where they have access to the river, to trees, to the beauty of nature. Belle Isle dates from the 19th century, if I'm not correct. And so, and it's one of the places in the city where blacks have always been free to go. And that's not true of all of the city of Detroit. I was talking to a neighbor recently who said that her family always chose to have picnics there because they knew they could go there without being afraid of being harassed, whereas in some other parks in the city, they were not so sure of that. So it's been around for a long time and a part of black cultural history for a long time.
We used to go there and play baseball. Of course, that was one of the things we did. But it was also a chance for the whole family, pretty much. When I say whole family, there were probably maybe 10 of us, 12 of us, including aunts and uncles. We'd go to Belle Isle, and people would have a chance to sit around and, as I like to say now, they could tell lies to each other, you know, and enjoy telling lies to one another, which was a way of communicating things that happened to them during the week, a couple weeks or whatever. And just sharing that, it was a nice thing to see people willing to share bits and pieces of their lives with one another. And Belle Isle allowed you, a place like Belle Isle allowed that to happen.
Well, it's coming back considerably.
Well, one thing about it, it's larger now because there have been more fill-ins. And there was a time when we were kids, we could come out here and stay all night and lay on the banks. But you just have a curfew now. You stay just so many hours and you have to go in. You know. And it was very beautiful then. We had a lot of beautiful flowers and things. And they've added quite a few things. But the old Belle Isle was the best Belle
Isle. This is the only park that I come. This is the only park that I come because I don't believe this other park better than here. Always in here. Always in here.
No, y diles que en Chicago todo es bonito también.
Dice que si hay algo tan bonito en Chicago como aquí.
Hay cosas más bonitas.
No, no, como aquí, entonces ¿para qué vienes?
A ver de aquí.
On the island?
Like the music, you know, we like the music. You know, there's always lots of loud, good music, and
Watching the sights.
yeah.
People going swimming in the dirty river.
It's just, it's a lot more happening here, I think.
Yeah.
To the beach,
Sound good to me. Sound hard, sound funky, people gon' dance to. Give the record a second and a chance to. Hitting people like a scene of a movie. While they slipping back from his plan.
It's more of a gathering, of a reunion, a family type of park.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you bring the east side and the west side together here, you know, yeah, you know, everybody has a good time, most of the time.
Until the cops come and make you leave.
You know, but
everybody has such a good time that they make you leave.
But it's, you know, it is a gathering place for east and west side.
It's hard to explain because it depends on their background. From where I'm from, the younger crowd is the crowd that's a trouble type of crowd. But if they're out here, it's more likely a gathering. And as they gather together, all of them come together, it's more like a family. No matter where you're from, once we get out here, it's, you know, like I was over here with another family today. And I call all of us family because of our nationality. But anyway, it wasn't no trouble for me to go over here and play with them because I didn't have nothing to play with. They, you know, they accepted me as I was, and you know, and it's more like a family thing when we all get out here together, especially on holidays.
I don't know why they do that.
Like,
nobody's really doing anything wrong. They're just sitting around and partying and listening to the music, and then the cops come.
I would think that they probably did it because, you know, this spill out.
They close it down just like that. But they don't start. They usually don't start down here. They go down there on the strip. Saying, well, it's time to go. Good night. Good night. The island's closed. So let's start rounding everybody up and put blockades in the entrance so people can't get on. But you can get out, but you just can't get back on. That's how they close it.
But I don't think they should, like, just cut the party, you know, at 10 o'clock on a Saturday night. You know, that kind of don't set too well with most people. That's for real.
He got all of us here. Right now. And then if the police clear the place, everybody's gonna go out on the street.
Barbecue ain't done. I will offer us some.
We are centuries later now, and still this sacred ground calls us to remember, to beat, to be. This sacred ground calls us now. We are centuries later, but this sacred ground still calls us to beat, to be. Beat Congo Square. Be Congo Square. Beat, be. Beat, be. Beat Congo Square. Be Congo Square. Beat Congo Square. Be Congo Square. Remember, Congo Square. Be Congo Square. Be Congo Square.
There was something sort of leveling about Congo Square, and that perhaps is part of its true beauty, that kind of leveling impact. Everyone was there for basically the same reason. Everyone was there because they were permitted to be there by law, required almost, but it was a kind of temporary escape, and it was relative freedom. And so there was this kind of leveling impact. And of course, once the music started, once the trading and the singing and the dancing started, once the bambula started, then that was a great leveling influence there.
Congo Square came to me in 4 or 5 different ways. One way was through the collection that Cables did for Harper's Review around the turn of the century, and there were drawings. Those drawings were people dancing and gathering in Congo Square, our ancestors.
And there are images that you can look at. There are woodblock prints and engravings that demonstrate the bambula, but it's one of those circle dances that is probably like the grandma of all of those ring games that little black children specialized in up until, I guess, the 1960s and 70s. I don't know if they're still dancing them, but it's one of those ring dances, and it's accompanied by drum, and at that time, of course, it would have been accompanied by the instrument that was referred to simply as the quill, which was a rude reed instrument made from the natural reeds from the swamp and bayou areas. So it was a dance in which you had central performers who came to the center and did their thing and then went back into the crowd. And so you can see how it's kind of an equalizing thing, because everybody gets to shake their thing, everybody gets to demonstrate whatever is their particular gift. And so it's strange kind of equalizing thing. But if you look at it really closely, I think you can see the importance of improvisational skill, the importance of being able to do it, to create a thing of beauty with exactitude and precision there on the spot.
Another way it came to me was through the prevalence of dance that is obviously African-inspired dance that goes on in the streets of New Orleans and continues to this day, so that young people who will do all the latest dances that are done all around the country, be it a television, when it's second line time, they will come out and do these dances, and when you see them, you know this is a whole nother thing going on. A third way that Congo Square came to me was through the literature, specifically through the autobiographies and the interviews with some of the musicians, the older musicians who talked about Congo Square. Sidney Bechet is probably the best known one that I can point to. In his autobiography, Treated Gentleman, he goes back to an ancestor who danced at Congo Square, an ancestor of his, as a direct inspiration for him in terms of music.
What more should I have expected from such a legacy? In order to understand the loss of Franklin Park, I needed a new view, a new vision of this place. I began to search for old memories and old conflicts in these other parks as a way of uncovering the secrets of this space.
From the long poem, Desperate Circumstance, Dangerous Woman, and it's called Faubourg, and it describes this little world, the Faubourg Treme. The Faubourg is a city within the larger city, and the women walk in pairs and clusters, moving along the slave-bricked streets, wearing print dresses, carrying parcels on their hips or heads. Within the small city of the Faubourg, there is always work to be done, rooms and yards and laundry to see to, and always some trouble to be put to rest. Burdens to be shifted from an arm to a hip, from a hip to the head. There are children to be scolded and sung to. There are wares to call out, to sell or buy or search for at market. And along the narrow banquets leading there, a cook, a seamstress, a day's work woman to find or be found. There are chickens to feel and buy and get their necks wrung, palm oil to buy and sell, palm wine, hot sweet potato pies, and there are blues to be sung or heard above the trees and rooftops all hours of the day and night. The dead must be mourned and sung over, and prayers told them to carry to the other side. The dead must be chanted and marched to their tombs, and the tombs then tended and the dogs kept away. Yata leaves must be dried and woven into belts and baskets. Rags must be burned in sulfur to ward off mosquitoes, and slave brick crushed and scrubbed across doorways. There is love to be made, conjure to be worked, and quiet as it is kept, most anything can be done in the Faubourg. In such a city, what name is good for a woman? In such a city, what good is any woman's name?
Thank you for bringing us together here. And we thank you as we celebrate today for the beautiful women and men who lived here and celebrated here so many years ago and made this square and made this city what it is culturally, musically, and in so many other ways.
You know, and like I come up with an uncle, George Landry, we called him Big Chief Jolly. He was what is called a Mardi Gras Indian here, you know, and like that's more than meets the eye. Because the Mardi Gras Indians are more than just some black guys that put on pretty costumes at Mardi Gras. This stems all the way back to this same piece of ground where the Native Americans accepted Africans running away from the white folks.
The person who lived and had a mansion in this area was Claude Treme. in the 18th century, and he subdivided lots and sold them to free people of color, and that began the neighborhood. This was before 1800.
So many of these structures predate the old city of New Orleans because this section was never destroyed by fire. So the bricks that we stand on now, the bricks that we're sitting on and standing on and walking on, many of these are the bricks that were made by the slaves who were enslaved to the brick factories. So we're actually sitting and talking and living and breathing the oldest history that this place knows as a developed community.
It's a city square block, which means it's 2 square blocks on each side. And from all reports, it was where Orleans came into the Rampart Street. And as I'm looking straight past you, I'm looking right at the St. Louis Cathedral. And from some of the ancient sketches, the old sketches from the 19th century, we've always seen the bambula with the church steeple in the background. So I think when you stand in the center of Congo Square, you're in the center of what was happening 200 years ago.
What Congo Square did, the creation of that space, what that did was it allowed those early Africans and their descendants, the first black New Orleanians, to come together and to make religion, to make the spirit. Now, of course, to white overseers and slave owners and slaveholders and so forth, it was just a bunch of niggas getting happy.
Many jazz historians trace the basis of drumming, which was important in jazz, of African retentions in terms of languages, in terms of dance, in terms of societies, in terms of dress. All of that is you can trace back to places where people were able to meet and interchange. In a famous article by George Cable, he listed more than about 24 West African ethnic peoples who were in this one spot. So you see what a tremendous commingling and what's the word we want? It was just a place of great interchange.
And of course, there's certain basic things. The closeness of the earth, being able to step on, to stand on the naked earth with one's naked feet, being able to bear one's naked soul.
I don't know what this place is except a spiritual epicenter that represents a spiritual harvesting place for the real owners of this land, who are Indians, Homers, the collar pieces, the Coshadas, the Tunica, the upper, the lower creeks, the true owners, and us. And the only reason we're not attacked by those folks is simply because we did something with the land. We came and we invented the pitch system, the tar system that held these houses together. We created something for mankind out of this.
What you're really talking about is how people come together in a new and basically alien place and unify themselves and create sacred spaces.
The rhythms that were played here in Congo Square, you know, the many nations that gathered here, and the fact that the Native Americans also had their corn feast and other spiritual ceremonies on this same ground gives this place this, you know, its holy essence almost, you know.
People weren't meeting there anymore. I mean, I think it's funny because when we studied it, it was a popular place for Africans to go, but under some control. But if there was ever a hint of political problems or insurrection or the drumming got too vibrant, then they closed it down, maybe for about 4 or 5 years. And finally, during the time that segregation laws were imposed, around the 1890s, they closed it down altogether. So the cultural does impact the political and the economic as you become conscious of it. In our lore, New Orleans black lore, and also documented in history, the 2 or 3 individual slave rebellions where people had a particular cause and killed their masters. All these rebellions were tied to Congo Square. The most famous was the case of Bras Coupé, a slave who was promised manumission and never given it. He was a great dancer at Congo Square and well known. He killed his master and escaped out to the swamps near Lake Pontchartrain.
This place is coming into its own again. And the only way to make sure that that happens in a healthful and in a helpful way is if we recognize and honor the spirit, not just of Congo Square as a place, but honor the people who stood on that ground. Because we're coming at this late date, hundreds of years later, we're coming to some recognition of what is meant by that expression, sacred ground, holy ground.
Long before I came to Detroit, everybody down south said they ever sent somebody up north come back and told us about Belle Isle. Now, we didn't know how it looked. We just had all kind of crazy imaginations. When I come here, I was wondering what Belle Isle was like. I had never been to a place where you got an island inside a river. Now, in the meantime, you got to remember, this is World War II built up. All these different ethnic groups was coming, whites and blacks was working together for the first time in history, together. I mean, right on the line and shoulder to shoulder, muscle to muscle, and all that stuff. And there was a lot of tension in the city between these different ethnic groups. So all that tension was in there. Now, the day it exploded, I was out there with my wife and baby, that baby mom. And there was several little flare things happening out there. And you being on the island, there was a lot of people out there. Around over 150,000 more people out there. And around about 5 o'clock, it was getting a little more rowdy. So with no transportation come over on Belle Isle, they used to have little ferry rides down side the river to take you over there. They cut out all the transportation, so everybody had to walk out of Belle Isle that didn't have a car. They said that somebody threw a baby in the river. Now, whether that happened or not, I will never know. And I don't know who else will know, but that's what the rumor was, that they had threw a woman and a baby in the river. But it's really, the real explosion started that evening on Belle Isle, transformed to the city, and down on Forest at that time we had a fancy club where Paul Robeson used to come and sing. And hell broke loose down there. And then what we began having, blacks was pulling whites off the streetcar, and white folks pulling black folks off the streetcar whenever they come through the neighborhood. I mean burning, shooting, and a lot of shooting took place in that because a lot of people got killed.
I wasn't living in Detroit at the time, but the tension, I think, across the country was tremendous during that period. And we had what we called it a demonstration in Harlem the same year. In fact, our C.L.R. James and I were putting out a newspaper called Labor Action in New York. And the press was calling it a riot, and we were calling it a demonstration. What you labeled it was very, very important, because we wanted to show that was an outgrowth of the conditions and not just people killing one another.
It could have happened in a factory. Belle Isle was where everybody went.
On the other hand, people would go to Belle Isle to recreate, to enjoy themselves, because during that time there was very little housing for people. People were renting rooms, and so you'd have your whole family in a single room in a rooming house. This was white and black, and there's so that you'd go to Belle Isle to sort of relax. Now, I think it's interesting. I don't think the actual fighting began on the Belle Isle Bridge, but it really took place up and down Woodward Avenue, because on one side of Woodward Avenue was Cass Corridor, which is where the white folks lived. On the other side of Woodward Avenue, where the black folks lived. And the blacks particularly were very, very hemmed in. And it was just waiting to explode, actually, because there were very few places where they could get home or get housing. And one of the effects of one of the reasons why you just so call it a riot was that as a result of this explosion, housing began to open up to some degree.
We'll see that we only utilize this space because the powers that be allow us to. We don't own it.
From this park, we developed a strategy. The police looking for that street was decoy and go various ways, including some up that way. The courthouse, where justice is supposed to be dispensed, City Hall, was the main targets always. And of course, the stores that had been been segregated so long. Who are they who are brave enough and free enough in the land of the free and home of the brave to fight for freedom? Well, this is the center of where it was. You come out that door, you're right in the park here.
Your nation's capital, the city that they were going to make the model of democracy. I was there working for the Federal Bureau of Investigation when they started, as they tried to do here, by integrating the parks. They had 5 swimming pools for Negroes and 5 for whites. They decided to go along with this grand social experiment, and they integrated the pools. The next week, the Negroes had 10, the white people had none.
See, I don't think that we have so much sense. I think God puts into you at a moment in history what you ought to do to make his will come through.
Well, this is where it happened. I mean, this is where the kids gathered and were fire hosed, and this is also where 16th Street Church is located. 16th Street Church is not just known for the very sad moment when 4 young girls died. It was noted for, prior to that, a cultural center in Birmingham. You know, back in the 50s and even back in the 40s and later, that was a place where outstanding black leaders would come.
Because that was the church downtown where we could be closer to the facility to demonstrate. You couldn't walk 5 miles from where my church was out there downtown. The police wouldn't let you get here. But Bethel was the headquarters for the movement. That's where I pastored, where I lived, and where we met when we couldn't meet anywhere else. It was bombed twice. It was bombed, as I told you, on Christmas night. That was my Christmas present from the Klan, 1956. They said God saved him to lead the fight. So I said, yeah, let's fight then. The key to all of it, though, was I'm an actionist, and so was Wyatt Walker. Wyatt's a dramatist, you know. And we mapped out the drives that really turned this city upside down. So we challenged everything. Lola Hendricks went down to challenge the libraries. We had somebody at the park. We started challenging Kittyland Park down here, as I told you, where you could see all the little white kids enjoying themselves, and black folk got to... About Martin Luther King wrote about that, you know, in his, from the jail.
Marvelous stage for this incredible struggle between 2 power structures.
Kelly Ingram Park was a place where neighborhood picnics took place, where there were arts festivals and other kinds of outdoor activities sponsored by a local neighborhood association.
So this park wasn't called an exclusive city park. Wasn't no bathing and swimming and all that stuff, and certainly wasn't integrated.
But this was the heart of the black business district in the 40s, 50s, 60s. So it was an appropriate place for celebration of the culture of African American life in Birmingham.
Now you must remember that Birmingham had sued me. At this time I had been in jail 10, 15 times, I guess. And it was always Birmingham versus Shuttlesworth. I decided that the best defense was a good offense. I started suing them. So the park situation is Shuttlesworth versus Birmingham. And of course, when the case was won, they decided to shut the park down so that nobody has any recreation. This is how bad segregation is. We can't enjoy it together, nobody has it, white nor black, so that the people who espouse segregation couldn't have the privileges of segregation.
I'm talking to the Negroes in Birmingham, Alabama. Do you know that we had 4 swimming pools for whites, 4 for the Negroes in Birmingham? 3 of the 4 Negro pools far excelled all 4 of the white pools. We had a golf course for the benefit of the Negroes, about 150 or 200 played. It cost you taxpayers $21,000 over and above revenues from that golf course to subsidize it for them to play on. They had their own recreation centers, their own tennis courts, their own playgrounds, but this was not enough. Now, what was the reason that the federal courts came in and decided to force integration? Now, will you pray tell me if you have a swimming pool here that cost $150,000, one a mile away that cost $150,000, built by the same contractor, from the same specifications, same size, and cost the same, but you ask the Negroes to swim in this one and the whites to swim in that one, what is so degrading or humiliating or inhumane about such a system?
Well, one thing, you drain all the water out of the swimming pools. That's a first step. You put fences up if you need to put fences up. But the most ingenious of all the things that they did was when they filled up the holes on the greens on the golf courses with cement. And that stopped the game of golf, except it really didn't. People were still out there, and it took the police to clear them away at times.
And this is the stupidity of segregation. Nobody enjoys anything, whereas the real thing ought to be that everybody enjoys it equally. So rather than for Negroes to participate, segregation said we don't have anything. It made the city look bad, and the parks were indeed closed.
And when nothing came of those suits, then he decided on direct action.
Of course, Bull Connor accommodatingly arrested, but he didn't realize that jails were becoming full.
And Walker and Shuttlesworth hit on the right solution. They invited children from as young as 6 to as old as the late teens to join the demonstrations. And they trained them, carefully trained them, in the whole practice of nonviolence. And then started using them, much to the horror of many in the black leadership in Birmingham, and much to the surprise of Eugene Bull Connor, who had never had to deal with children.
We made the decision that the children had to be into it because there's no better thing that anybody can gain at any age than freedom.
And the Alabama Christian movement for human rights must also be praised. Without a doubt, the world will never forget the thousands of children and adults who gave up their own physical safety and freedom and went to jail to secure the safety and freedom of all men.
We could be downtown, and we could march from 16th Street into this park and on up the streets and so forth and so on.
And the more power Connor used against them, the more they won, until finally they broke through the ranks of the firemen and the policemen and flooded downtown and literally scared the power structure half to death. And the end result was an agreement, and he won. And the city power structure and the white power structure lost. They had to give in.
The city of Birmingham found some money through a bond issue and other sources to renovate parks in the area, in downtown. A few years ago, some private dollars went to renovate Lynn Park, which is a park that's nearest the City Hall and the county courthouse. Our same mayor, who was instrumental in getting money for this building, said, look, I'd like to see a civil rights district, and I'd like to see that park as a major part, the outdoor experience of that district. So we were able to get the services of a wonderful landscape architecture firm, Grover Harrison. We engaged the services of a specialist in outdoor sculpture from New Orleans. We talked to people who had marched. We talked to people who had led the marches. And we said, tell us. We talked to people who lived in the area. We said, tell us, what happened in this park in 1963? Our mayor came up with the language from revolution to reconciliation. So that park was to be the place where a lot of things happened that were a struggle based on race, but now it's a place where people can come together and be reconciled.
a place that people brought families to just sort of lay out. Tennis was still going on, very hot and heavy. I was here, as I say, weekends, but it was a busy park. When I began teaching here for recreation, we utilized the park in that they built the swimming pool, which that was the only swimming pool in this area. They gave swimming lessons at the park. Then we had water shows, which were fabulous. In those days, there was a lot of synchronized swimming going on. I mean, this was where you came. So all the family, everybody came. I mean, those bleachers were packed because their children were the performers. You know, if you get the children, the parents are going to come. So this whole area was utilized. Families would come barbecue on Sundays.
It was difficult. It was difficult. The infirmary was my family. The kids were my family. They brought me. They invited me to their homes. The parents loved me. What I had done there, as I saw, was bridge the gap to get into real recreation, where we were into the area of growth and development, and also recreating. Playing also. We played, we did the same kinds of things, but we had a different attitude and philosophy about why we were doing it and what we wanted to get out of it, because that was a ladder to the next step for living a good life. That's what we were doing in the Oakland Recreation Department. Everybody was looking at the Oakland Recreation Department during those years because it was working. The black youth were getting more training in leadership development, and they knew how to find their way through the system better, because that was what I was teaching. The Panthers were then growing, you see, and they were getting stronger, and they attracted those young, more difficult to serve young people that I couldn't handle in our centers, and they could handle those. As the upper level staff changed, you could begin to see that the philosophy was beginning to change. After the first superintendent left, the whole philosophy changed. And they had new board members, and they changed the name of Oakland Recreation Department to Oakland Parks and Recreation Department. I still had some contact with my former program director, and she said, well, Dorothy, they're changing the philosophy. It must have been about 1965, because I was just about to leave Oakland at that time. But they didn't have the same kind of staff at the infirmary that we had that was committed to growth and development. When it changed its name, emphasis was more on parks. They began to charge. Everything had a price. And when you begin to charge people, it takes something away from it.
'60s was an interesting time because it began to move more from a social kind of setting to one of more political. It was a place that we began to have community meetings, which weren't, or at least I wasn't conscious of them growing up, you know. But the infirmary became a place for the community coming together, talking about the issues that surrounded problems that we're having or things that were getting done or weren't getting done downtown. As we moved into the later '60s, they started having rallies here. it became a place where, especially in the later 60s, where the Panther Party became very visible, so that they would be out here on Sundays going through drills, marching, recruiting, of course, from the march, and they had meetings over here. It was a place, much like the group out here today is doing. You heard it sort of through a cultural kind of extravaganza, a festival, furthering ideas of political kind of consciousness, and it became very much a stronghold for that. And in fact, probably, it became more useful then by more people than at any other time, because the parks are always, this park specifically was always crowded on Sunday.
So when we needed a place to rally, because there was always this bureaucratic red tape that we had to go through in terms of getting some place to hold our rallies, all I had to do was come over and tell the director that we wanted to use this park, and they would make it available. So after little Bobby Hutton was murdered in the Oakland Panther police shootout in 1968, we renamed this park Little Bobby Hutton Park.
You see, after they killed off the Panthers, you see, arrested them, even though the city had said that it was put parks first, they let the trees become infested so that worms took over the trees, and their little drippings and strings would just come down to the ground. So the ground became infested. You couldn't walk across the Infirmary Park. I was just sick. I couldn't believe what I saw.
I don't know if down the line some major business will probably end up there, but that's certainly the trend, since we don't own this property. We only claim it. We certainly do not have deeds, so anytime the city administrators decide that they want to run through here some condominiums, and that's certainly the trend, or some Japanese developer decides he wants to buy this to put up some condos, then this place will be condos. And then we will really begin to see the connection between what Malcolm called the land and the bread. And Malcolm has made it clear that all revolutions are based on land. So when we start trying to take this land as our very own, then I think that our whole politics was
Each of these parks had its own conflict. In Congo Square, there's talk of placing a casino in the middle of the square. On Belle Isle, the Detroit Grand Prix was moved to the island. The search left me with more questions than answers. Had there been a fight or conflict in Franklin Park?
I think a Miraflora is a criminal type action that's been perpetrated on the black community.
He's being very evasive.
that he is not being as open and honest with us as we have tried to be with him.
We ask for you to have people to answer questions and to deal with our problems, our questions that people are asking.
There were going to be all kinds of contracts, and black people were going to make a lot of money off of AmeriFlora. That sold AmeriFlora to the black community. I don't think the masses of people were engaged in that process at all.
I do not feel that the citizens of Columbus, and I know everybody keeps thinking it's a black issue, thank you, sir, because blacks lived around that park. But I know there were numerous numbers of white folk in this city with kids that could not attend that event. I feel your citizenry was just disregarded and brutalized in this whole process. The consultants who came in, and as I understand, told you 3 times it wasn't going to work, but you did it anyway.
So explain to me about all these programs that you're going to have after the park closed and the AmeriFlora's gone. Who's going to go to them? Who's going to be able to afford it? Let's get real.
Had the power led to the reshaping and reclaiming of Franklin Park and these other parks, or was it all just progress in urban design of America?
That day we had Ali Taylor in the park, and we had some other noted figures out here also. And you know, at that time we had been boycotting most of the schools in Columbus because they didn't teach anything African. So there was a lot of problems in the black community and the city at large. So we had asked all the black students to walk from their respective schools to Franklin Park on that day. And anywhere you were in the city, you would see large crowds of 400 or 500 black students walking down the sidewalk, carrying banners, the black, red, and green flags, signs, coming to Franklin Park. Most of them called it Malcolm X Park. And we rallied here, and I would guess anywhere, maybe about 5,000 or so when we started. By the time we got back to this park, I think we had at least 10, 15,000 people. And every house we passed, just empty. Everybody came. We had grandmamas, grandpas, the little babies, everybody was in this park after the rally. And I think that was a turning point when the city actually realized that they had to take this facility away from the black community. And as far as the other uses of the park, the political aspects of it were actually just stopped. And I don't think there's been anything out here held politically since then.
So I ended up finding 4 different types of parks in American city life. Well, I named the first one the Pleasure Ground from 1850 to about 1900. It's meant to be a contrast to the city, whereas the city is gridded, the park is going to be curvilinear and soft. And the second one, the Reform Park, from 1900 to 1930, we have to start cleaning up the city itself, and parks can be a part of that. And the third one is the recreation facility from 1930 to 65. There's a view of the city as a kind of a machine that's not yet working quite right. It's missing here and there. So if we get the right ratio of hospital to open space to residence to commercial, all will be well. And from 1965 on right into now, we're in what I call the era of the open space system. The park can once again be used to solve urban problems. So we have a more liberal attitude towards the spaces. We also have a more liberal attitude towards the programming. It's been brought up to date. There's more popular music. There's more contemporary art. More popular culture has been incorporated into it. So you get a more liberal, freer model. Not yet completely overcoming all the splits between popular and elite culture. Armstrong Park is the park that's been created around Congo Square, which was the original gathering place of slaves on their day off. And it's a very beautiful space with very beautiful trees around it, but then it's in this context of what I would call a recreational facility, a pretty boring park. And my understanding is that there used to be a neighborhood there, I think it's called Tremy, and that it was urban renewed out of existence, and a park put in its place because a park isn't a nice, innocuous thing that no one politically is ever against. But I must say the innocuousness shows in the design. It's just, you know, the classic little bit of everything approach.
We don't look at the park as an aesthetic inheritance from the city. The park is political. The name is political. No one thought enough about Pops to name this park behind it because they loved him so much. They named this park because black folks that lived in that community felt that we should at least try to have some semblance of a black something here in the city, since you took so much of a black community away. So that's what's important about Congo Square.
See, the history, this complex layering of four different sets of ideas about parks has been lost. And so a contemporary designer just thinks, well, we'll have a bit of each, and they don't even know that they were once distinct models. So they have a berm for visual protection, and they have some play equipment because you have to meet the needs of all age groups. That comes straight out of recreation facility thinking. There's a radio station that actually broadcasts out of that park. So there's a mix of interesting things and then some pretty dull, very ordinary stuff. I think it just suffers from the lack of historical clarity and a kind of political sleight of hand. You know, it's just like this is the easy thing to put in place when you want to tear down a poor community.
Well, it's important to recognize that for about a decade now, the city has been proceeding along lines that would develop a certain section of the city and pretty much leave the rest abandoned to deteriorate. The idea of the city planners is to develop from beginning at the boulevard, it's called the boulevard, where the General Motors has its headquarters, and then move towards the river, where we are now, along a strip where they're developing what's called the Cultural Center and the Medical Complex, and then developing from this area on the river right down to Belle Isle, actually, a series of housing complexes to attract management and executives, basically, back into the city. And Henry Ford was very much invested in this idea of the Renaissance Center being this symbolic reclaiming of the downtown area. And one of the things that John Portman, as the designer, as the architect, one of the goals, one of his jobs, was to try to come up with a design that would make that statement.
And this is my impression of when I first moved here. It's called Out My Window. The oyster-shadowed sky coughs red-orange, fire that tongues the morning as white incestuous clouds move together. Rinsen, one large word processor, never stops, blinks messages back and forth from the silver-black ramparts. Sand dune, Blue Cross Blue Shield sits patient and waits for another opinion. 1,300 eyes Lafayette with quiet disdain as it peeks from its penal colony gray wall. Chrysler School trimmed in baby.
Portman understood that his job was to attract ruling class, corporations, people of power back into the city, and he had to come up with a structure that would do that, that would make that kind of a statement, really an imperial statement, a power statement, a control statement, and that's in fact what he has done.
On and off. Then condos, apartments, office buildings, hotels strike new bright color. Some the same old stingy white. The long, smooth plate glass river stops, looks through itself, then past the Belle Isle Bridge, and the cylinder stacks of Seven Sisters. Then Lake St. Clair drops to the end of the world.
The atrium is a very important design feature for John Portman. He's used this particular feature in practically every building that he's put up around the world. San Francisco, Hong Kong, in his own town, Atlanta, and here in Detroit. He worked for a while as a designer of department store spaces. Department stores from the 1900s included what they call the rotunda. And the rotunda, which was the big open space with light streaming down, often with elegant chandeliers hanging, was thought to give people a sense of the expansiveness of space, to make them feel an illusion of grandeur as they entered a building, and also to sort of invite them up and into whatever the store was trying to get them to buy. He always tried to simulate nature in terms of sounds, in terms of lighting, in terms of greenery, foliage, color. And so I was curious whether people related to that. And they said, yes, they liked all of those things that they found in the building, but they weren't attracted to it because of those things, because it was like nature. They knew they were coming into an artificial environment, and they liked the kind of illusion, the glitziness of it, the glamour of it, the splendor of it. So it's very important to those people who are in power, city planners, developers, corporations, to assure their users that they can be safe in these environments. So rather than extend outwards and develop outwards into the natural environment, there's an effort to sort of bring the illusion of naturalness into these closed, protected environments that have, hundreds of security people operating in them, and to give the users this sense, well, yes, I can enjoy the feeling of a waterfall, the feeling of light, the feeling of plants and trees growing, and I don't have to be outside where I'm more vulnerable.
It's definitely a private space intended for use by a certain class clientele.
Well, I think the shopping mall has kind of taken the place of a neighborhood park by default. It's the one place you can go to that's neutral turf, that's fun to be, that's close and tight.
In our society, we like to spend money. We spend a lot of our time doing it, but it's a capitalistic society. I mean, that's what happens, and those spaces should be enjoyable. I mean, I don't agree with it having to be a mall, per se. I don't like malls myself, that sort of homogeneous sort of development that they create. But I think a lot of people do enjoy doing that. That's become a pattern for their life in a way. I mean, that's what they do on the weekends.
The mall is there for one reason, that's to make money. Okay, and the minute that our use of it gets in the way of that, we'll find that people are not welcome in the mall anymore.
I read of a recent court decision where a judge argued that if a mall is the only public space in a community, it has to be treated as a public space, even though it might legally be in private hands. So what that ends up meaning is that if some people want to hand out leaflets and the owner doesn't like that leafleting, he or she has to still allow that leafleting if it's the only public space in town. What I find ironic is that nobody wants anything that is awkward or makes middle-class people uncomfortable. They don't want homeless, for certain. And now, in contrast, in the 19th century, there was a pretty active socialist movement on the part of German immigrants. So there were serious speeches made in American public places about alternative social and economic systems. But here, I don't think there's such an explicit threat to the established social order, and yet the control over who's there and who isn't there seems to be more rigid and more filled with anxiety. We pay people to keep other people out.
materialism. We watch TV, we go out, fast food, we go shopping, you know, but again, you know, our whole environment is based on sort of this ideology of this European fantasy. You know, some designer goes to Rome and sees the piazzas, you know, they come back here and try to design the same thing. It's a totally different culture here. That, to me, our urban piazzas are our shopping centers, our movie houses. It's the record stores. That's where people gather. And those spaces should be designed for that kind of activity. They should be celebrated.
I mean, you hear teenagers say, now I'll meet you at the mall. You used to say, I'd meet you at the park. I think they're suffering because of that, though, because the mall is a monetary hangout. And if you don't have the money to do it, I think it makes kids get motivated to get that money by hook or crook.
People are there to spend money, and they're there to walk around and show off their wares. You know, their Nikes and their jogging suits, and they're there to take it if they can't buy it.
Many of the children that we see out here playing now, many of the people that are still in this community are not necessarily mall, you know, part of that mall culture. And I think that here you really clearly see the sort of sociological statistic that says that most black people live and die within a 2-mile radius. I think that there are many people who are right here, you know, in any direction within a mile that haven't been too much farther than this.
So those same attitudes that the youth have, you know, in the park in terms of violence, they also unleash that violence in the shopping malls. So if you're talking about similarities, that violence spills over into even that environment.
People in cities believe that parks are primarily playgrounds. The concept of the park, as public space for people to go to enjoy seeing nature inside the city, is an idea that seems to be dying.
The park was closed, and in response, the African American community held a huge coming home reunion on Mount Vernon Avenue. As early as 1901, a city newspaper commented on African Americans gathering on one hill in Franklin Park, the same hill where we gathered, the same hill where construction began for AmeriFlora. We gathered at the park because other young folks gathered at the park. But who had told them, and who told those before them? I don't know where it started.
We are back here again today to say that in the near future, we will be calling on this community to rename this park again, Malcolm X Park.
3 years later, AmeriFlora was over, and African Americans had come back to their space to celebrate Malcolm X's birthday. It seemed like a new spirit of energy came alive in my hometown that day. and a new sense about design of the cities and the need to find and claim a space in time.